I always thought it would never happen to me. You hear stories about it, you see it in movies, you read about it online, but deep down, you believe you're immune. That your marriage is different. That your wife could never do something like that. I was wrong. It started with little things. Laura, my wife of 25 years, began acting distant. At first, I told myself it was nothing. People change as they get older. Life gets in the way, careers, kids, bills. It wears you down, right? But there was something more. Something I couldn't put my finger on. Then there was the phone. She never used to be so secretive with her phone. She'd leave it lying around, unlocked, while we watched TV or had dinner. But lately she'd keep it close. It was always in her hand, and when she got a message she'd angle the screen away from me. I told myself it was silly to think anything of it. Everyone is on their phone these days. It's normal. But that gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. Laura wasn't in bed. That wasn't unusual. She often got up to use the bathroom or grab a glass of water. But after 10 minutes, she still hadn't come back. I got up to check on her. I found her sitting in the living room, phone in hand, staring at the screen. Her face was illuminated by the blue glow, her expression, tense, focused. I stood there for a moment, watching her unnoticed. She was typing a message, then deleting it. Typing again. I couldn't see what she was writing, but her body language told me everything I needed to know. She was nervous. I cleared my throat, and she jumped like she'd been caught stealing. "Oh, Jack! You scared me." Her voice was light, too light, and she fumbled to lock her phone. "Couldn't sleep." "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "No one," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Just scrolling through some emails." I nodded, pretending to believe her, but something inside me shifted. A little crack in the foundation of our marriage, a crack that had probably been there for a while but that I was only now noticing. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I couldn't focus at work. That image of Laura, sitting in the dark, glued to her phone, kept replaying in my mind. Her nervousness, her evasiveness, it all screamed guilt. But guilt over what? Was I just being paranoid? Was I reading too much into it? When I got home that evening, Laura greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. Dinner was ready, the table set, wine poured. It all felt too perfect. Like she was trying to cover something up. "So, how was your day?" she asked, cheerful as ever. "Fine," I said, watching her closely. "Yours?" "Busy. The usual." I nodded, playing along. But inside, I was unraveling. The suspicion was eating away at me. I had to know the truth. Later that night, when Laura went to take a shower, I saw my chance. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, charging. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. I respected her privacy. But that night, something took over. I needed answers. I unlocked the phone. The passcode was still the same. I opened her messages, scrolling past the usual conversations with friends and family. Then I saw it. Marcus. I recognized the name immediately. He was an old colleague of Laura's from years ago. They had worked together briefly, and I remembered him being charming, confident, and a little too friendly for my liking. But back then, I hadn't thought much of it. The messages between Laura and Marcus were recent. And they weren't about work. "Miss you," one of his messages read. "I can't stop thinking about last weekend," said another. My stomach dropped. My hands shook as I scrolled further. Last weekend. She had told me she was going to visit her sister. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? We'd been married for over 2 decades. I trusted her. Or at least, I had trusted her. There were photos, too. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to leave no doubt in my mind. A picture of Laura and Marcus having coffee together. Another of them sitting close on a park bench, her head on his shoulder. I put the phone down, my mind racing. My heart pounding. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. It was real. Laura was having an affair. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying that hard to hide it. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. My mind went blank for a moment, then filled with questions. Why? When did it start? How could she do this to me? To us? I heard the shower turn off. Panic set in. I put the phone back where I found it and returned to the living room, pretending to watch TV. Moments later, Laura walked in, towel wrapped around her hair, looking as calm and content as ever. Everything okay? She asked, her voice soft. I forced a smile. Yeah. Everything's fine. But inside I knew nothing would ever be fine again. I sat there, pretending everything was normal, but my mind was racing. The man messaging my wife wasn't just some stranger. Marcus wasn't a nobody from a dating app or a one-night mistake. No. He was someone we both knew. Someone I had met. Someone who had once shaken my hand and looked me in the eye. I wasn't just betrayed. I was targeted. And that changed everything. Let me tell you something. When you realize your marriage is a lie, there's a moment when time stands still. You don't feel anger right away. You don't even feel sadness. What you feel is numbness. A kind of dead silence inside you, like your soul is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. I didn't say a word to Laura that night. She kissed me on the cheek before going to bed, completely unaware that I knew her secret. But I couldn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, my thoughts running wild. Should I confront her right away? Should I call Marcus and tell him to stay the hell away from my wife? Should I leave and never come back? No. That would have been too easy. I needed to know why. Why him? Why now? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, how far were they willing to take it? Because one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. The next morning, I woke up early. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, but I felt wide awake. My mind was sharper than it had been in days. I wasn't going to explode with rage. I wasn't going to beg for answers. No, I had to play this smart. I needed information. Laura was already up, standing by the kitchen counter with her coffee. She looked peaceful, like a woman without a care in the world. I stood there for a moment, watching her, wondering how she could look so calm after everything I'd seen the night before. "Morning," she said with a smile. "You're up early." "Yeah," I replied, forcing a casual tone. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded and took a sip of her coffee. "You've been restless lately. Everything okay?" I wanted to laugh. "Is everything okay? Are you serious?" But I didn't show any of that. Instead, I shrugged. "Work's been stressful." She gave me a sympathetic look. "Maybe you need a break." "Yeah, a break," I thought. "Maybe you do too, from Marcus." I sat at the table, watching her move around the kitchen. My mind was calculating every detail. I needed to find out when they were meeting again. If they thought they could keep sneaking around behind my back, they were wrong. But I couldn't confront them yet. Not without a plan. That's when I saw her phone again. It was on the counter, right next to her coffee cup. Unlocked. She was distracted, pouring cereal into a bowl. I could have grabbed it right then and there, checked her messages, maybe even found out when they were planning to meet next. But I didn't. Instead, I took a different approach. "You still talk to Marcus?" I asked casually, as if the name had just popped into my head. Her hand froze for a split second before she kept pouring. It was subtle, but I noticed. "Marcus?" she repeated, feigning confusion. "Yeah. Your old colleague. You mentioned him a few months ago, didn't you?" "Oh, right." She smiled, but it was too rehearsed. "Yeah, we caught up a while back. He's doing well." Caught up a while back, I thought. Sure. Over coffee? Or in a hotel room? "That's good to hear," I said, keeping my tone light. "You always said he was a good guy." She nodded quickly, too quickly, and changed the subject. So, what's your plan for the day? I let it go, for now. Later that afternoon, while Laura was out running errands, I decided to check her computer. It was risky, but I couldn't let this go on any longer without knowing more. Her laptop was in the office, and I knew she never logged out of her email. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, in her inbox, was a string of emails from Marcus. They weren't labeled anything suspicious, just catch up and meeting notes, but I knew better. I opened one, and my suspicions were confirmed. Looking forward to seeing you again. Same place as last time? And her reply. Can't wait. Friday works perfectly. Friday. That was tomorrow. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt the blood rushing to my ears. They weren't just sneaking around. They had a planned rendezvous, right under my nose. This wasn't just a fling. It was ongoing. And they weren't stopping anytime soon. But neither was I. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I pushed it down. I needed to keep a clear head. They thought they were in control. They thought I'd never find out. They were wrong. Tomorrow, I was going to be there. And I wasn't coming to watch. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Laura moved around the house as if it were just another normal day. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, saying she had some errands to run. I knew exactly what her errand was, Marcus. They had a meeting planned, and she was walking out the door with that same calm, collected expression. I let her go. I wasn't going to confront her at home. No, this needed to happen on my terms. I needed to see them together with my own eyes. To catch them in the act. There's something about seeing the truth unfold in front of you that makes it undeniable. No more doubts, no more excuses. I grabbed my coat and keys, my mind laser-focused on what was about to happen. I followed her car at a safe distance. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have, but I kept my focus. I'd never done anything like this before, never imagined I'd be tailing my own wife like some private investigator. But here I was. She drove out of town, past the familiar streets and into a quieter area, heading toward a small boutique hotel on the edge of the city. The kind of place where people go when they want to keep things discreet. I felt a lump in my throat as I watched her park her car. Then, right on cue, Marcus pulled in. He got out of his car with that same cocky swagger I remembered. Tall, confident, with that smirk that always seemed like he was in on a joke no one else knew. I stayed in my car, heart pounding, watching as Laura walked up to him. They didn't hesitate. No awkward greetings, no small talk. She went straight into his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. They kissed. And just like that, whatever hope I had left inside me shattered. It was one thing to read messages, to see photos. But seeing it happen right in front of me, watching my wife kiss another man, that was something else entirely. I could have stormed out right then. I could have made a scene. But I didn't. Not yet. They went inside the hotel, and I waited. My mind was spinning, replaying everything I'd seen. The way she looked at him, the way he held her. It was intimate, familiar. They weren't just having an affair. They were comfortable with each other. Like this had been going on for a long time. And that's when it hit me. I need more than anger. I need leverage. I waited for about 20 minutes before I got out of my car. My heart was still pounding, but my resolve was stronger than ever. I wasn't here to be a victim. I wasn't here to cry or beg for answers. No, I was here to take control. I walked into the hotel and approached the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, barely glanced up. "Good afternoon," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm looking for my wife. She's meeting someone here." The receptionist's eyebrows raised slightly, but she didn't question it. "What's the name?" "Laura." She tapped on her keyboard, then nodded. "Room 12. They checked in about 20 minutes ago." "Room 12. I repeated the number in my head, feeling the adrenaline spike in my veins. I nodded, thanked her, and walked down the hallway. My footsteps echoed off the walls, each step louder in my ears. Room 12 was at the end of the hall. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my heart thudding like a drum. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Burst in? Knock? Shout? But before I could decide, I heard voices from inside. Laura's voice. And Marcus's. They were laughing. Laughing. Something inside me snapped. Got it. Continuing the story in English now. Let's keep the tension high. The drive home felt longer than usual. The silence in the car was deafening. No music, no radio, just the steady thrum of the tires on the road and the pounding of my heart. The anger had faded, replaced by something colder, a calculated calm. This wasn't just about emotions anymore. It was about control. Marcus thought he had me beaten. He thought he held all the cards. He was wrong. The next morning, I made a couple of calls. The first one was to Greg. Greg was an old friend. We'd known each other for years, back when he was still on the police force. He'd left the job under murky circumstances, something about taking things into his own hands one too many times. Now he worked as a private investigator. Not the cleanest profession, but exactly the kind of ally I needed right now. Jack, he answered, his voice gravelly. It's been a while. What's going on? I took a deep breath. I need a favor. There was a pause on the other end. This isn't about work, is it? No. I leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping my coffee mug. It's personal. Another pause. Greg wasn't the type to pry, but he wasn't the type to back down from a challenge either. I'm listening, he finally said. I gave him the rundown. Laura. Marcus. The affair. The threats. When I finished, there was a low whistle from Greg. Jesus, Jack. That's a lot. Yeah. And you want me to do what exactly? Dig up dirt on this guy? Exactly. I set the mug down. I need leverage. Something that'll make him back off for good. Greg chuckled. You always were a stubborn bastard. All right. Send me his details, and I'll see what I can find. Thanks, Greg. I owe you one. You owe me more than one, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. But I'll add it to your tab. With Greg on board, I felt a little more in control. But I wasn't done yet. The next step was Laura. We hadn't spoken much since the confrontation at the hotel. She knew the silence between us was different this time. It wasn't the usual kind of marital silence, the kind that happens after a petty argument or a rough day. No, this was the silence of a man who had seen too much and was done playing games. I caught her in the kitchen that afternoon, standing by the sink with a glass of water. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wary. Jack! Laura! The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. We need to talk, I said, keeping my voice steady. She set the glass down. I figured this was coming. Good. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Because I'm done pretending everything's fine. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of the situation had finally settled on her. I know. Do you? I took a step closer. Because I don't think you understand what's at stake here. I do, she said softly. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. It's more than that, Laura. You put us both in danger. Her brows furrowed. What are you talking about? Marcus, I said, the name like poison on my tongue. He's not who you think he is. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I shook my head. You've been meeting him, trusting him, and all the while, he's been playing you. He's got a history, one that I'm digging into right now. Her face paled. Jack, I'm not doing this for you. I cut in. I'm doing this for me. To take back control of my life. Silence hung between us again. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up my coffee and took a long sip. Then I looked her straight in the eye. Now? I said. Now we wait. And when Marcus slips up, and he will, I'll be ready. The next few weeks passed quietly. Marcus stayed out of sight. No messages. No phone calls. It was like he'd vanished from our lives. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to retaliate, to come back with some new threat. But he didn't. Maybe he'd finally realized he'd lost. Laura and I barely spoke. We moved through the house like strangers, careful not to cross paths too often. Every conversation felt forced, every glance filled with unspoken words. The betrayal still hung between us, heavy and unyielding. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't that same man from before. The man who ignored the warning signs. The man who let his life slip out of his control. I had taken a stand. I had fought back. And I had won. Or at least, that's what I thought. Until the day Greg called again. Jack, Greg said, his voice tense. We've got a problem. My stomach tightened. What kind of problem? It's Marcus. I sat down, gripping the phone tighter. What about him? Greg sighed heavily. He's digging around. Asking questions about you. What kind of questions? The kind that make me nervous. He's not done, Jack. He's planning something. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Of course Marcus wasn't going to go quietly. Men like him never did. What do you suggest? I asked. Greg was silent for a moment. Then he said, We need to get ahead of him. You've got to be ready for whatever he's planning. I thought I scared him off. You did. But now he's coming back for revenge. I rubbed a hand over my face, feeling the exhaustion settle in. I was tired of this game. Tired of constantly looking over my shoulder. But I wasn't going to back down. I'll handle it, I said. Jack, I said I'll handle it. Greg sighed again. All right. Just be careful. The next day, I got another message from Marcus. We're not finished. Meet me. You know where. I stared at the message for a long time. This time, it wasn't anger I felt. It was resolve. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to end this, once and for all. I arrived at the park early. The same bench. The same spot where I'd confronted him before. Marcus was already there, waiting. But this time, he didn't look smug. He looked desperate. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes tired. Whatever plan he had, it wasn't going the way he expected. When he saw me, he stood up. Jack! Marcus! We stood there in silence for a moment, two men locked in a standoff. I thought you'd given up, I said. Marcus shook his head. You really think it's that easy? I think you've lost. He laughed bitterly. Lost? You don't even know what this is really about. I raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. It's not just about Laura. It never was. You've had something I've wanted for a long time. And what's that? Marcus stared at me, his expression dark. Your life. Your stability. Everything I've never had. I blinked, surprised by his honesty. That's what this was? I asked. Some twisted jealousy? He shrugged. Call it whatever you want. But I'm not walking away empty-handed. I shook my head. You already have. You've lost everything. Marcus smirked. We'll see about that. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, unsure what to make of his words. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. When I got back home, Laura was waiting for me again. What happened? She asked. Marcus, I said simply. Her face paled. Is he? He's not done, I said. But neither am I. Laura nodded slowly. What do we do now? I looked at her, my gaze steady. We keep going. We don't let him win. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us too. The days went by, and life felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. I knew Marcus wasn't done. Men like him never walked away without trying to reclaim control. He was waiting for the right moment to strike, and I had to be ready when he did. Laura and I were still living in this tense, uneasy truce. We spoke about practical things, groceries, bills, appointments, but nothing real. The air between us was filled with unspoken regrets, pain, and maybe even guilt. I wasn't sure if we'd ever be able to bridge the gap. Then it happened. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then, a familiar voice. "You thought you were smart, Jack." I sat up straighter. "Marcus. You thought you had me backed into a corner. Thought you could scare me off." I didn't say anything, letting him ramble. "But here's the thing about guys like me," he continued. "We don't scare. We adapt." I clenched my jaw. "What do you want, Marcus?" There was a low chuckle on the other end. "Oh, I don't want anything from you. But I figured you should know. I've been talking to someone." I frowned. "What are you talking about? I think you know her pretty well." My blood ran cold. "Laura." Bingo. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind racing. He was trying to manipulate me again. Trying to make me doubt everything, to make me question Laura's loyalty. But I wasn't falling for it this time. I found Laura in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. "Laura." She looked up, startled by the sharpness in my voice. "What is it?" Marcus called. Her knife clattered to the counter. "What?" "He said he's been talking to you." Her eyes widened. "No. Jack, I haven't spoken to him since. I need to know the truth." I took a step closer. "No more lies. Are you still in contact with him?" "No." She grabbed my hand, her grip firm. "I swear, Jack. I want nothing to do with him." I searched her eyes for any sign of deception, but all I saw was fear. Fear of losing me for good. "He's trying to get into your head," she said softly. "Don't let him." I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Then we need to finish this." "How?" "I have a plan." The next day, I made my final move. I had gathered every piece of dirt Greg had found on Marcus. Bank records. Emails. Court filings. It was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence, enough to ruin Marcus's life completely. I sent him one last message. "Meet me. Alone. This ends today." He agreed. We met at the same park, but this time, the energy was different. Marcus wasn't smirking anymore. He looked tired, worn down, like a man who knew he was running out of time. "You've been busy," he said, nodding toward the folder in my hand. "Very," I replied. "And this? This is the end of the line for you." I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, his face growing paler with each page. "This is everything," he muttered. "Everything," I confirmed. "And I've got copies. So here's how this goes. You walk away. For good. You don't call Laura. You don't call me. You disappear. Or this goes public." Marcus clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "You think you can threaten me?" "No." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I know I can." There was silence as Marcus stared at the folder, his mind racing. I could see it in his eyes. He was calculating his next move. But he had no moves left. Finally, he sighed, tossing the folder onto the bench. "Fine. You win." I didn't move. "Say it." He met my gaze, his expression hard. "I said you win." And just like that, it was over. When I got home, Laura was waiting for me at the door. "What happened?" she asked. "It's done," I said, setting my keys down. "He's gone." She exhaled slowly, a look of relief washing over her face. But I could see the question in her eyes. What about us? I don't know what happens next, I admitted. But I know one thing. What's that? I'm done being the man who lets life happen to him. I'm taking control. Of my life. Of my choices. Laura nodded, tears in her eyes. I want to be part of that, Jack. If you'll let me. I didn't have an answer right away. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free.